All right, today we're going to be talking about St. Anselm and his ontological argument. In this video, I'm going to begin by talking about the prologue, and then we're going to look at chapter 2 that's titled, That God Truly Exists. This is on page 18 and 19 of the book Hackett's Reading in the Philosophy God, the second edition. This is the textbook for this class. And I'm also going to include a scan of this reading on the website in case you haven't had a chance to pick up the book yet. I've also included audio files in case this helps you with the reading. Now, just to warn you, if you listen to the audio files, I recorded them myself using my voice, so you will get a lot of my voice if you listen to the audio files, but I've uploaded them just in case it's helpful to have the readings read to you. Okay, so in the prologue, Anselm explains how it is that he came to write Proslogoion. And we find out that he'd published a previous work investigating the rational basis of faith, and that while he was doing this, he noticed that he'd done it by chaining together many different arguments to establish this rational basis of faith. And this kind of made him wonder if he could find a single argument that alone could be used as a proof for God's existence. And we see that this is what's happening in Proslogoion. He thinks that he's found this single argument that can be used as a proof for God's existence. Now, if when you started the reading today, you had no idea what was going on, that's okay. This is a really, really hard piece of philosophy. This might be one of the hardest things that we look at all quarter. So if you didn't understand what was happening, that's okay. That being said, it can still be really instructive because the process of watching something that you read the first time and you have no idea what's going on slowly unwind in front of you and start to make sense is tremendously valuable. And in many ways, I think that this is the primary experience that I want people to have in this class. Reading something the first time, not understanding what's going on, and then carefully returning to it until they start to figure out how it works. So to do this, our strategy for today is going to involve working through chapter 2 line by line. When we do this, we're going to discover that an argument emerges. Okay, so I'm going to begin at the beginning of chapter 2. Therefore, Lord, you who grant understanding to faith, grant that, insofar as you know it is useful for me, I may understand that you exist as we believe you exist, and that you are what we believe you to be. Here Anselm's pointing out that God provides people who have faith in him understanding. Anselm is asking God here to allow him to understand if God exists as we believe God to exist, and if God is what we believe God to be. So, this part of the reading is not crucial for the argument, but it does point to an important skill in philosophy and I think in life in general. And that's being able to identify what is included as just a setup, but isn't important for the argument that's being made, versus what is very central to a point or to an argument. So this beginning of chapter 2 is not important. So that being said, I would just encourage you to sort of set it aside. Continuing on with the reading. Now we believe that you, God, are something than which nothing greater can be thought. So here, Anselm's explaining how it is he understands God. But what does this mean, to believe that God is something than which nothing greater can be thought? Okay, that than which nothing greater can be thought. What is this? So, we'll begin by, I'll ask you, what is the greatest thing that you can think of? Greatest here could mean the biggest. It could also mean the most powerful, or any other number of other ways that you can understand greatest here. So just think to yourself, what is the greatest thing that I can think of? Anselm's point is that whatever this greatest thing is, God is greater than that. Right? So perhaps the thing that you thought of was the universe. The universe is pretty great. Anselm's point is that God is greater than that. Perhaps the greatest thing that you thought of is the combined power of all of the stars in existence. That's pretty great. But Anselm's point here, God is greater than that. Right? Anselm's claim is that whatever the greatest thing that you can think of, God is greater than that. And further, what he's saying is this is how we understand God to be. So we understand God to be greater than anything that we can think of. And this gives us the first premise in our argument. God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. And I've included it there in that delightful acronym. Continuing on with the reading. So, can it be that no such nature exists, since the fool has said in his heart that there is no God? This is from Psalms 14:1 and 53:1. So here, Anselm is recognizing that some people, including who he identifies as the fool here that's cited in Psalms, is going to say that there is no God, right? So what is happening here? This seems like a really obvious objection to believing that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. So let's see what happens. But when the same fool hears me say something than which nothing greater can be thought, he surely understands what he hears, and what he understands exists in his understanding, even if he does not understand that it exists in reality. For it is one thing for an object to exist in the understanding, and quite another to understand that the object exists in reality. So what's happening here? So when the fool hears that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, he understands what these words mean. You can think about this in the same way that they made sense, hopefully, after I explain them to you, right? So we might think about this as grasping the concept of God being that than which nothing greater can be thought. So you can understand what something is even if you don't think that that thing exists. So here, think for example of a dragon or a unicorn, right? I can understand what a unicorn is without believing that a unicorn exists. So we can understand what we hear. So for example, I know what you're talking about when you use the word unicorn, right? Even if we don't believe that this thing exists, just in the same way that I don't believe that unicorns exist. However, according to Anselm, when we understand what we hear, this thing exists in our understanding. So, because I understand it, the word unicorn and the concept of unicorn exist in my understanding. So from this, we get a couple more premises to our argument. So to begin, God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. When we understand something, that thing exists in our understanding. So, because we understand that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, God, as that thing, exists in our understanding. Now, we'll continue on with the reading. And surely, that than which nothing, and surely that than which a greater cannot be thought exists only in the understanding. For if it exists only in the understanding, it can be thought to exist in reality as well, which is greater. So if that than which a greater cannot be thought exists only in the understanding, then that than which a greater cannot be thought is that than which a greater can be thought, but that is clearly impossible. Therefore, there is no doubt that something than which a greater cannot be thought exists both in the understanding and in reality. So this gives us the end of our argument, right? God is something than which nothing greater can be thought. When we understand something, that thing exists in our understanding, remembering that we understand that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. So, God, as that than which nothing greater can be thought, exists in our understanding. But if God really is that than which nothing greater can be thought, then God must not exist only in our understanding, but he must also exist in reality. Because if God didn't also exist in reality, there would be something greater. And this would be the thing that exists both in our understanding and in reality. This, however, is a contradiction. So, we get the conclusion of our argument. God exists both in our understanding and in reality. So, I'm sure that there's a lot of questions. And the next writing assignment, you will have the opportunity to ask these, and I will